I'm Eleanor Burke, 73 years old, and that Thursday morning, I packed my overnight bag with more care than I'd admit out loud. I tucked in my lavender scarf, the one Daniel gave me in Maine before the cancer came. I folded 2 blouses, a paperback, and the ginger candies I kept by the bed just in case my stomach turned. Brendan hadn't called in months, but the text came late the night before. Can't wait. 2 words after Kayla's bright voice invited me on a surprise train ride through the countryside. It sounded simple, gentle, even healing. That's the word she used. Healing. And despite everything I said yes before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever questioned whether kindness was genuine or just another setup. I grew up in Kansas, in a modest house with creaky stairs and a garden. My mother loved more than television. I was raised on small things that mattered. Clean hands, polite words, hand-written thank yous. My husband Daniel believed in those same things. We met at the library where I shelved books, and he corrected the crooked displays without asking. We made a quiet life of it, not wealthy, not grand, but ours. And when Brendan came along, we gave him steadiness, even when we couldn't give him ease. Things began to change after Daniel passed. Brendan was kind in the ways that didn't take time. A grocery delivery, a text on holidays. Kayla came into his life like a gust of order, structured, elegant. Practiced in the way she set napkins and corrected grammar. She said all the right things. At first brought me tea, asked about my knees, called me mom in front of strangers. But in private, there was distance, the kind that doesn't need words to make itself known. I started getting left out, not suddenly, not in ways you could point to, but in slivers. Thanksgiving changed locations without telling me. Birthday dinners turned into quick doorstep deliveries. I stopped asking why after a while. You learn not to beg for belonging, and still, when Kayla called that Wednesday with her syrupy voice and said they wanted to treat me to something special, an old restored train through the hills near Des Moines, I said yes. Not because I believed her, but because some part of me wanted to. They picked me up in her sedan. The next morning, she wore a yellow dress and a scarf tied like a stewardess from an old movie. Brendan rode in silence, eyes fixed on his phone when I asked about work. He nodded. Once the train station was small, tucked behind an abandoned feed store. The kind of place you'd miss if you blinked too long. She handed me a thermos of tea, said they needed to check with the ticket agent, and kissed my cheek before disappearing down the platform. I waited. I watched the tracks shimmer in the sun. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The breeze picked up, and with it came a quiet that felt too still. I stood to stretch my legs, and that's when I saw it. A note taped under the bench, folded like it didn't matter, but it did. And what it said made everything fall silent. The paper was thin, but it cut through everything like glass. It was taped just under the bench where I'd been sitting for almost half an hour. The handwriting looked like Kayla's careful round letters tilted slightly to the right. I peeled it off, slowly, smoothed it open with both hands, and read the sentence twice before it made sense. If she still has her mind, she'll find her way back. No greeting, no signature, just those words. I stood there without moving for a while. The tracks behind me were empty. The sun had shifted, and the station felt like it belonged to another time. One where people still waited with purpose, where trains arrived and left with rhythm. Now there was just stillness and the weight of that sentence pressing against my chest. I turned slowly, hoping their car might still be parked nearby. But the lot was bare. The air had a sharpness to it, not cold, but alert. I stepped inside the station. There wasn't much to it. A couple of benches, some faded flyers, and a vending machine blinking out of order. The ticket counter was closed. A note taped to the glass said back in 15, with no name, no clock. I sat for a few minutes, then stood again. My knees buzzed from the sitting. Not pain exactly, more like a warning. I walked out to the road, gravel crunching under my shoes. The path sloped down past the old feed store and into a stretch of cracked sidewalk that gave way to dirt. The countryside opened in front of me, flat and wide and quiet. I walked slowly at first, then faster, not because I knew where I was going, but because standing still made it worse. Mile after mile passed. The sun moved higher. My legs ached. My throat felt dry. I stopped once near a ditch to rest and drank the last of the chamomile tea from the thermos. It was lukewarm and sweet, but tasted wrong now, like something given with bad intentions. The gas station came into view around late afternoon. Faded green paint peeling from the sides. Single pump standing like a relic. I leaned against the wall near the ice chest and tried to slow my breathing. A pickup truck rolled in, not fast, not slow, just certain. A man stepped out, keys in hand, flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up. He glanced at me, didn't speak, just nodded, then filled his tank when he passed by to go inside. He paused and looked again. His face wasn't unkind, just observant. "You from around here?" he asked. I met his eyes and said plainly, "I was left at the station." He nodded again. "I know the one. I used to work there before they cut the hours. You need a ride somewhere?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want help, but because trusting someone felt unfamiliar. Still, I said yes. And he opened the passenger door for me. Without a word, the cab smelled like motor oil and something faintly sweet, maybe mint gum. He didn't talk much, just drove steady along the back roads. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. He didn't ask questions, didn't press. Instead, he let the road and the hum of the engine speak for us. The sun had begun its descent, throwing long shadows across the dashboard. I leaned back, feeling the warmth from the vents, and watched fence posts tilt past, like tired men. He said his name was Harold, didn't offer more, and I didn't ask. Eventually, I told him mine, and he nodded, like he'd already known it. We pulled into his driveway just before dusk. Bare trees lined the property, and the house behind them was small. Modest weathered, but it looked lived in. He led me to a recliner near the window, then disappeared into the kitchen. He returned with a wax paper-wrapped sandwich and a cup of black coffee. I ate slowly. Every bite felt like something returning to me. Not just food, but a sense of steadiness. He didn't ask for my story. Just let me sit in peace. When I finished, he showed me to a spare room with a cot and clean sheets. I didn't sleep right away. The room smelled faintly of cedar, and the wind outside brushed against the windows. Like a soft hand, I lay still, letting the silence settle over me. My thoughts replayed the morning, the invitation, the thermos, the note taped to the bench. There was no mistake now, no missed message, no confusion about what had happened. They left me, not for a moment, not by accident, but on purpose. The next morning, Harold drove me home. The sky was pale and flat, the kind of light that doesn't belong to any season. He didn't fill the space with talk, just turned on the radio and let it play low. When we pulled into my driveway, I paused before getting out. The house looked the same, but I didn't. He handed me a folded slip of paper with his number written in careful block letters. "If you ever need someone to remember what really happened." "I'm around." I nodded, thanked him, and stepped out. The front door was unlocked, which was unusual. I always kept it locked, even when I was inside. The lavender diffuser had gone cold. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleanser. Not the kind I used. My rug near the back door was shifted just an inch, but enough to notice in my room a drawer was cracked open. Inside, my file folders were out of order. The power of attorney documents, the living will, the old insurance forms, some were missing. Some had been moved. The safe in the closet was untouched, but the keyhole had fresh scratches. Nothing was gone, but everything had been touched. I sat on the bed slowly. The tea kettle in the kitchen began to whistle. I hadn't turned it on. I didn't call anyone that day. Instead, I waited. Let the stillness return. Then I walked to the hall closet and pulled out my old travel bag. Tucked underneath the winter coats, I placed inside a fresh notebook, a pen, and the burner phone I had purchased months earlier when Kayla offered to move me to a family plan. I zipped the bag and slid it under the bed. Tonight, I would rest, but tomorrow, I would begin something else. I woke early the next morning before the sun had reached the windows. The air in the house felt heavier than usual, not with cold or weather, but with something I couldn't quite name. I made tea in silence, placed the mug near my usual chair by the window, and opened the notebook I had packed the night before on the first page. I wrote the date in small, neat print underneath it. I listed 5 things. Front porch light was on upon arrival, drawer, lock scratched envelope, seal, loosened, bank access, changed. Kayla, M. Burke added. Each item had its own line. No emotion, no commentary, just fact. An hour later, I slipped the notebook beneath the loose floorboard in the hallway. Daniel and I had used that hiding place years ago for travel money and extra keys. I tapped the board twice to make sure it was flush again and let the memory pass through without holding on to it that afternoon. Brendan called. His voice was quieter than usual. Not hesitant, just worn like he'd been rehearsing something. He asked if I needed anything. I told him I was fine. He said he might stop by tomorrow just to check in. I said, that would be nice. He came the next day, just before 4, carrying a container of soup and wearing the same cautious smile he'd had since college. We sat in the living room where the light fell across the carpet in soft lines. He asked about the train ride. I answered vaguely, then let the silence stretch for a moment. Kayla's been worried about you, he said. I turned slightly from the counter and gave a small smile. She's kind, I replied, then turned back to rinse the spoon. He didn't stay long, maybe 20 minutes after he left. I went to the front door earlier that morning. I had placed a sticker behind the upper corner of the trim. Nothing big, just something to catch movement. It had peeled back slightly. Someone had checked the lock from outside. That night around 7, Kayla stopped by unannounced, holding a loaf of banana bread, still warm from the oven. She smiled and said she missed our chats. I told her I had too. We sat in the kitchen while the bread cooled. She asked if I had been taking my vitamins and offered to help with the mail again. I nodded, slowly, while I poured more tea. I watched her from the corner of my eye. Her gaze drifted toward the hallway near the coat closet. She didn't go there, just shifted slightly in her chair and caught herself. I dropped a spoon on purpose, bent to pick it up, and caught her half standing, then laughing lightly, as if nothing had happened later. I opened the notebook and wrote, Brendan visit, brought soup. Kayla observed hallway's subtle movement when unobserved entry recorded and stored. No need to expand. I knew what I saw. The next day, I opened the closet and pulled down the old tape recorder we'd used once for family messages, back when answering machines still had cassettes. I dusted it off, slid in fresh batteries, and tested the red buttons record and play pressed down together. The motor whirred softly. I tucked it into the guest room under a towel on the side table, the room Kayla often offered to help me organize. Especially the desk drawers, she liked to call it sorting. I had started to call it watching. I moved slower now, deliberately, not from weariness but by choice. I let my words pause, mid-thought, sometimes let mugs rattle slightly when I reached for them. Once I asked Kayla to remind me of Brendan's birthday. She laughed kindly and said, I must be tired later. I made a new entry. Kayla mentioned memory twice once in passing. Once more directly. Recorded tone, neutral reaction, withheld. The following morning, I placed a small calendar on the fridge and filled it with appointments. None of them real names, from high school lunch dates with neighbors I hadn't seen in years, scribbled casually as if I'd been too distracted to cross them off. I left a note on the bathroom mirror that said, "Don't forget to turn off the stove." 2 days later, I watched Kayla notice it. Her expression stayed calm, but her fingers tightened on her phone. She took a picture when she thought I wasn't looking on Friday. She brought over a new planner, said it would help me stay organized. Tucked inside was a pamphlet from a nearby Elder Services Center. She pointed to the phone number and said gently, "Just in case you ever want to talk to someone." I thanked her and went to the kitchen where the tape recorder was hidden beneath the drawer that stuck. I listened later to her voice, clear and smooth. "Brendan and I just want her to be safe once we file. It's only temporary. We'll keep it quiet." I rewound the tape, listened again, then copied the file onto a USB and labeled it June Visit. I placed it inside an old sewing tin, the same one Kayla had given me for Christmas 2 years ago. That night I reread every notebook entry looking for patterns. They were there in the pauses in her questions, in the way Brendan's eyes scanned the room, now more than they used to, in how often they offered help with things I'd never needed help with before. I wrote 3 more pages, carefully. Brendan increased contact, emotional tone. Flat. Kayla offered assistance on multiple fronts. Watch for coordination on Sunday afternoon, I invited Kayla for tea again. The kitchen caught the late sun, the kind that makes even old tile look golden. She arrived cheerful as always, complimented the smell of lavender, and asked about the planner. I had placed the recorder beneath the cushion of the chair. She always chose. We spoke about small things, Brendan's work, her students, the garden outside. Then she paused, touched the edge of her teacup and said, "I've started tracking a few things for you doctors' renewals. Just little things Brendan and I might help with managing soon. There's a process for that." I didn't answer right away, just nodded and offered more cookies. Then she said, We've already started filing for temporary guardianship, just until things settle. It's what's best for you." Her voice was warm, almost apologetic, like she was explaining a late library fee. I reached for a tissue, dabbed my nose and said nothing. She patted my hand, the way she always did. Calm, quiet authority. Later that night, I played the recording back 3 times. Her words were clear, steady, measured, not rehearsed, but prepared. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the notebook open to a fresh page. Then I picked up the phone and dialed Martha Reed's. Her voice came through crisp and warm. She remembered my name immediately, said she still had her gray yoga mat from when we used to go on Thursdays, when I told her what was happening. Her tone shifted. She asked if I had documentation. I said yes, recordings too. She said, "Good, don't confront them. We'll start with the freeze." The next day, I met Harold at a diner off the highway. He wore a denim jacket and brought no questions. Just a quiet nod when I handed him a sealed envelope, the USB, the notebook, and my most recent will. He slipped them into his coat pocket without a word, then poured more coffee and mentioned the weather. We didn't speak of what came next. Just sat there as the waitress refilled our mugs at Martha's office. I handed her a copy of everything. She didn't blink, just opened a legal pad and wrote notes in a careful hand. She called it coercive elder abuse and said it was more common than most people thought. She showed me a form, a preemptive protective injunction meant to freeze any attempts to override autonomy before they could be filed. I signed it, her hand steady on mine. She said, "We'd file it under seal. Brendan and Kayla wouldn't even know it existed unless they tried to act." I left her office with one thought in mind. Keep everything the same on the surface. No sudden changes, no hesitation. Let them keep thinking I was forgetting while I remembered everything. I stayed at Harold's for a few days, not because I was hiding, but because I needed time to think. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles into your bones. The guest room smelled faintly of pine soap and something older clocks. Maybe there was a small desk by the window, where I kept my notebook tucked beneath the drawer each morning. He made oatmeal and left a clean mug next to the kettle. We didn't talk about why I talk. Was there just shared small pieces of the day, like neighbors passing on a sidewalk? Martha called on Tuesday to confirm the paperwork had been filed. The injunction was sealed, a court date set for 3 weeks from now until then. She said I should act as if nothing had changed. Keep routines soft, predictable. Stay in place. But I already knew that wouldn't be possible, not anymore on Thursday. Brendan called. His voice was light, almost cheerful. He asked if I'd been sleeping better, if I had everything I needed. Then, he said, Kayla had set up a meeting with someone at the bank just to go over a few things. I thanked him. Told him I appreciated their thoughtfulness. He said, "That's good, Mom. We just want to make sure everything's in order." I said nothing more. The next morning, I returned to my house. The porch was just as I'd left it, but stepping inside felt different. I walked room to room, touching surfaces as if to remind them I still lived there. Nothing obvious had changed. The furniture was still in, placed the framed photos untouched, but the space felt like it had been shifted slightly, like someone had worn it briefly and then tried to return it without leaving wrinkles. That weekend I joined them for brunch at a little cafe near the town square. Kayla talked about a beach trip she wanted to plan. Brendan nodded between sips of coffee. They asked about my garden, if the roses had survived the late frost. I answered, simply, smiled when expected. Kayla complimented my earrings, said they were elegant. I said, "Thank you," and didn't mention they had been Daniel's last gift before he passed after brunch. She offered to come by, help sort some mail. I declined. Gently, told her I had it covered. She didn't push, just smiled and touched my arm, the same way she did when she wanted something to feel like kindness. Later that night, I sat in my kitchen with the recorder in my lap, replaying older files, cataloging tones, pauses, glances. I highlighted one section from a week prior when Kayla's voice lowered. "Slightly, just until things settle," she'd said. I rewound it and wrote the timestamp in the margin of my notebook. The entry that followed was clean. June 12th, tone-measured language, softened intent. Clear on Monday. Brendan stopped by again. He brought a bag from the bakery, the one I used to take him to when he was small. We sat in the sunroom where the light came in pale and even. He mentioned the garden. Again, asked if I'd found my keys yet, said Kayla. Told him I'd misplaced them a few times. I said I had found them under the couch cushion. He nodded, as if that confirmed something. Then he asked if I remembered the passcode to my online banking. I looked at him for a moment, then said, I'd written it down somewhere, but couldn't recall it just then. He shifted slightly in his seat, said Kayla had been in touch with someone at the bank about simplifying things, just in case I ever needed help paying bills. I said. I appreciated the thought. His voice changed. Then he talked about work, said things had been uncertain lately, that his company was restructuring. He wasn't sure how long his role would last. I listened, quietly nodded when he said, These are hard times for everyone. He smiled, then relaxed, just a little. He added that Kayla had been speaking with a consultant about future planning, that I might see a few forms come through the mail. Nothing urgent, just routine. I asked if they were related to my medical directives. He said yes, among other things. That evening, I sat with my notebook in the kitchen and recorded everything I could remember, every shift in tone, every word he chose. I didn't write how I felt. I just wrote what was said, how it was said. The distance that had settled between us wasn't sharp. It was slow, like something poured too quietly to hear, but strong enough to change everything. I texted Martha that night from Harold's phone, told her we might need to move sooner. Brendan wasn't hesitating anymore. He wasn't watching from the edge. He was standing inside the plan, and that changed the shape of everything. The next morning, I was packed before the sun reached the porch. One suitcase, my notebooks, a thumb drive, my documents, and a small bag with essentials. The rest I left behind, the house, the furniture, the crystal bowl. Kayla never liked. It all stayed like a shed. Skin. Harold picked me up just after 7. He didn't ask where we were headed, just nodded when I slid into the seat and said, "The coffee was hot." We drove north past the edge of town into a quiet neighborhood with tall hedges and narrow streets. The house had once belonged to his sister, small, plain, curtains drawn but neat. It would be mine for a while. Enough space for a desk, a chair, and time. When we arrived, I placed the notebook in the top drawer of the bedside table, then pressed the key into my palm before slipping it into my purse. I called Martha from the kitchen, the candle burning beside me. She said, the final documents were ready. She had included a petition to freeze all pending legal actions related to my name, a full injunction against unauthorized guardianship, and a block on financial access. Without my physical presence, I didn't hesitate. I told her to file immediately, and she did. The rest of the day passed slowly. I opened the windows, let the air move through the quiet house, folded the blanket at the foot of the guest bed, then sat down and watched the sky change that evening. Harold brought dinner in Tupperware. He didn't ask questions, just set down a spoon and poured tea into the chipped mug I'd claimed as mine. We listened to the radio low under our breath, the room holding stillness like a quilt. Before he left, I handed him a second thumb drive. It contained every recording, every entry, every document I had saved since the morning at the station. If anything happens to me, I said, "This goes to Martha." He nodded, didn't speak, just tucked it into his coat pocket, like it was always meant to be there. And that night, for the first time in weeks, I didn't lie awake waiting for someone to explain themselves. I just let the silence hold me, and for once, it didn't feel like absence. Harold had fixed the back gate earlier that morning. The hinges no longer squeaked when the wind pushed against them. He didn't say much, just nodded when I handed him a small tin box to store with the others. It held another USB, a backup of the backup labeled with the date and my initials. Nothing more inside the house. The windows were open, the breeze was light but steady. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon balm and ink. I spent the afternoon going through every page of the notebook, copying the clearest audio clips to a fresh drive, separating each with printed transcripts. Brendan's questions, Kayla's tone, the planner, the pamphlet, the talk of temporary guardianship. I labeled each file. Carefully, by date, time, and room, I made a chart matching every visit with what was said and what followed afterward. Soup, 1 day, paperwork, 2 days later. Banana bread, followed by a discussion of tracking my appointments. Each entry had its own line and its own pattern. On Sunday, I invited Kayla again, just the two of us, for tea. She arrived in soft colors, her cardigan buttoned neatly at the collar and a fresh polish on her nails. She brought lemon scones and mentioned a new support group her friend had joined. They help people make transitions with dignity, she said, stirring honey into her tea. We could call someone just to get information. I smiled softly and placed a napkin over my lap. The recorder was beneath the cushion of the armchair again, where her voice would fall just right. "I've talked to Brendan," she said. A moment later, "We both feel it's best to get ahead of things before something happens, not to scare you. Of course, just to be careful. We've already begun the early paperwork. It's not permanent, just a safety net." She reached out to touch my hand. I let her. "We love you and want to make sure you're okay, even if something small starts to change." I nodded and offered more tea. That evening, I sat in the bedroom with the recorder balanced on my knee. Her voice still playing back clear and even, like she was giving instructions on how to water plants I saved. The file labeled it with the date and transferred it to the drive. The next page in my notebook was blank. I wrote just one line, "Guardianship discussed directly." Confirmation recorded filed afterward. I pulled out the folder Martha had given me and laid out each page side by side. A freeze order, a formal affidavit of mental competency, notarized a letter from my primary care doctor, and an outline of the upcoming court schedule. Everything filed, sealed and ready if needed. I placed the documents back into the folder and slid them beneath the drawer lining of the side table. Martha had been clear. don't show your hand. Not. Yet that week, I kept my outings simple. The market, the post office, the library, where the staff still remembered Daniel. I returned books I hadn't read and checked out 2 new ones. Both fiction, soft covers worn with time. I left a sticky note on the last page of one. Just a reminder to myself. You're not lost. You're preparing. I didn't know if I'd need it, but it felt like something I should do by Friday. Another message came through. This time from Brendan, he said. A banker would be calling just to confirm some joint access permissions. He said it lightly, like it was already done. I responded with a thank you and asked what time I should expect the call. He didn't answer until the next morning. Don't worry. Mom, Kayla's handling it. That's all he said. I called Martha right after breakfast. She answered on the second ring. They're moving faster, I said. She was silent for a beat, then said, I'll send the certified copy to the bank today. I heard her flipping pages in the background. Then she added, Stay where you are. If they call, don't engage. Just note the time and the number. We'll handle the rest. I thanked her and hung up. The call ended in under 2 minutes. That Sunday, I returned to my house just for the morning. Everything was untouched, but felt less familiar. The mail had piled up a bit, some flyers, some statements, a letter from the community center about upcoming workshops. I sat in my reading chair by the window and drank a small cup of coffee. The cushions still held the shape of where I used to sit every afternoon. I didn't unpack when the banker called on Monday. He asked for verification. I asked which account he was referring to. He said the joint one listed under Eleanor and Kayla Burke. I asked when that had been added. He paused, then said he'd need to check with a supervisor. I said I would call back later and ended the call without giving any information. I wrote the time down in my notebook and circled it in red that evening. Harold brought in the local paper, folded clean, at the corners, and a small bag of apples from a roadside stand. He didn't ask how the call had gone, just handed me a second lock for the guest room door and said, It's better if you have a key. I thanked him and placed the key on a small hook near the closet, not hidden, but not on display. Either. The next morning, Martha confirmed the bank had received the documents and issued a temporary freeze. Brendan and Kayla would be notified only if they tried to make changes or request access again. She said, They won't know. They've lost control until the door doesn't open. I sat with those words for a while, wrote them down, then folded the page and tucked it into the front of the notebook. I stayed quiet the rest of the week. No sudden moves, no extra visits. I returned to the cafe once where I'd met Kayla for brunch and left a business card from Martha's office in the coat room. No name, no note. Just a quiet presence in a familiar place in case I ever needed to point back to where things turned on. Saturday. I received another message from Brendan, this time shorter. We'll come by Monday around 10. Want to talk through next steps. I didn't respond, not yet. Instead, I packed a second bag, just a small one with copies of everything. A phone charger, a bottle of water, and the list Martha had written for me outlining what to do if I needed to step away without warning. That night, I watched the porch light flicker on the motion sensor, clicked twice, but no one was there. I checked the lock twice, then sat down and started writing. What would become the final section of the notebook? Not a summary, just a list of facts in order. Who called, what was said, what happened next. No conclusions, no assumptions. Just a record, something that could be held and read if it ever needed to be. And when Monday came, I was already gone. I didn't leave a note when I walked out of that house. Just a sealed envelope slid under the front door. The handwriting was mine, steady and plain. Inside were 3 things. The first was a printed transcript of the audio recording. Kayla's voice on record saying guardianship had already been filed. The second was a letter written in pen on my old stationery. No accusations, no anger, just a quiet account of what had happened and what I had chosen to do. And the third was a torn page from my yoga journal. A quote underlined in blue. When they believe you're weak, they forget. You still remember. Harold drove me early, before the light had settled on the porch. We didn't speak during the ride. The silence wasn't heavy, just full. We passed the bakery where Brendan had once taken me on my birthday, and the church where Kayla had sung at Christmas. The streets were familiar, but none of them asked me to stay the house. I returned to was small, tucked behind a line of hedges with a porch just wide enough for 2 chairs. I opened the door slowly, like I was entering something borrowed. The space was clean and still, the kind of quiet that listens. I lit a candle in the kitchen, folded a blanket at the foot of the guest bed, then placed the notebook in the drawer beside it. The thumb drive went into the metal tin tucked high on the shelf beneath the winter scarves. Martha called that afternoon to confirm the court had approved the full freeze on my estate. No financial changes could be made. No guardianship enforced, no access granted without a hearing. Her voice was calm even as she added, "They'll learn about it only when they try to act." I thanked her, and she said, I could now begin the process of reclaiming everything back in my name. If I wished, I said I'd think on it. Instead, I asked her something else. What it would take to start a foundation. A small one, just a local resource for women over 60 who'd been isolated or pressured into giving up control. She said it could be done, that it wouldn't take much, just a name and a mission. I told her. I'd call her when I had both that week. I began to move in a rhythm that felt like mine again. I kept the windows open, met 2 women from the local church who needed help with simple stretching and breath work. We used the living room rug as a mat, no mirrors, no talk of goals, just breath in, breath out. I wrote in my notebook only once that week. The silence feels clean, now not empty. When Martha sent the last confirmation email, she attached a scanned copy of the court order. It was brief but absolute. Any changes to my legal status, financial or medical, would be flagged and blocked. Without my presence, I printed it out and placed it in the same envelope with my birth certificate and will not. Because I expected a fight, just because I'd learned to prepare Brendan. And Kayla didn't call that week. No texts, no emails. The silence felt too long to be coincidence by Thursday. Martha sent word that someone from Kayla's office had attempted to schedule an appointment at my bank. Not under my name, but referencing a shared account. The manager flagged the request and referred them to legal. I didn't ask what happened in the room, but Martha told me what she'd heard. Kayla had entered first. Smiling, confident, Brendan followed his hands in his pockets. They presented a letter, not a court order, but dressed to look like one, requesting access, citing my mental confusion and emotional fragility. They used words like precautionary and responsible and urgent. But the bank manager had already received the court's notice 3 days earlier. Everything had been sealed. The accounts frozen, the will protected the joint, permissions removed. The manager remained calm, asked if I was present. Kayla said, "No, but she could authorize on my behalf." The manager tapped the screen once, then told her he couldn't proceed. Security was notified only as protocol. Kayla raised her voice. Brendan stepped in, tried to soften it, said, There had been a misunderstanding, but the moment had passed. Their story had lost its weight. They left without further discussion. Martha forwarded me the internal report typed plainly. Access denied pending legal verification. That's all it said. But it was enough. I sat on the porch that evening with a mug of mint tea. The air was cooler than usual, and the clouds were gathering slow and high. I didn't feel triumphant, just steady, like something had held. I stayed out there until the light thinned and the porch light clicked on. I didn't respond to the news with a call or a message. I didn't send another letter. The silence was doing what words couldn't. They had written a version of my life and expected me to follow the lines. But now the pages had turned without them knowing, and they were reading from a script that no longer applied before bed. I opened the small file folder where I kept the foundation forms. I wrote a name across the top, still hers, beneath it. I wrote the mission, one line only, to help women remember what they never forgot. I didn't know where it would lead or how far it would go, but I knew what it was for, and that was enough for now. I fell asleep that night without checking the locks, without checking the phone, and without feeling like someone might knock tomorrow. I would begin filing the paperwork, and the house where it all started would remain just that. A beginning, not a return. It was the bank manager who recognized Kayla first. She walked in alone, polished as ever, holding a slim folder and wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Brendan came in behind her. More subdued than usual, he kept his head down and offered a polite nod. When they reached the desk, they asked to speak with someone about updating permissions on an account, citing concerns about my memory and a shared interest in protecting family assets. The manager already had the certified letter Martha sent 3 days earlier, a court injunction sealed by a judge, and a full list of protected accounts and documents under my name. He scanned the screen, tapped a few keys, and asked if I was present. Kayla said no, but she had a signed letter from the family and could provide identification. Brendan didn't speak at first, just stood, slightly behind her arms crossed and waiting, when the manager explained that no changes could be made without my physical presence. Kayla kept smiling, but her tone changed. She said they had spoken to someone previously, someone who said it could be handled quickly. She offered the letter across the counter as if it would fix the confusion. The manager didn't take it. He repeated his answer clearly. Court documents have been filed by the primary account holder. No access will be granted without her in-person approval. Brendan finally spoke, his voice lower than I remembered. He called it a mix-up, said they were just trying to help, and asked if there was a way to speak privately. The manager stepped away, briefly, returned with a printed copy of the injunction, and placed it between them on the desk. Kayla didn't touch it. She just stared at the top of the page. The security officer in the lobby took a quiet step closer. Though nothing was said aloud, after a few moments, they left no signatures, no access, no changes made. Martha called me just before noon to let me know they walked out empty-handed. She said, "The bank's standing firm. You're safe." I didn't ask for details. I only wrote the date in my notebook and drew a line under it that evening. I sat by the front window with the shades half drawn. The breeze had picked up and the branches tapped lightly against the siding. The house smelled like cinnamon from the tea I had left, steeping too long. I watched a neighborhood cat settle beneath the hydrangea bush and stretch its legs in the soft dirt. Something about the stillness of the moment felt complete, not final, but intact. No one came to the door that night. No calls. No messages. The silence was clean, not charged. It was the kind of silence you can sit inside without checking over your shoulder. I wrote 2 short sentences before bed. Attempted access blocked and response confirmed in full. No other words felt necessary. The next morning, I wrapped the printed transcript from the bank visit in a plain envelope and added it to the tin, with the others tucked between the original note from the train station and the audio file of Kayla's voice saying, "We've already started filing." I didn't feel bitter, just thorough. I pressed the lid down until it clicked into place and placed it back on the shelf. I hadn't told them I'd moved out there. Had been no announcement, no forwarding address, no warning, and I didn't plan on giving one the porch light at my old house. Still came on every evening at 6, but no one was home to see it. Harold had offered to drive me past one afternoon just to check, but I said no. There was nothing left to recover. Instead, I spent the next day finishing the draft of the foundation charter. The words came easier than expected. Mission resources, application steps, a list of local organizations to partner with. I left the section for the name blank just for now, though I already knew what it would be called. Later that evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a small stack of letters in front of me, each envelope addressed by hand and sealed. The first went to Martha, a formal thank you, and an updated copy of my will. The second was for Harold, a note folded around a spare key and a list of contacts should he ever need to send anything on my behalf. The third letter was addressed to Brendan and Kayla. I left it unsealed. Inside was a single page typed and signed. It didn't mention guardianship or accounts or the bank. It didn't explain what had happened or why. Just one line: the moment you decided I couldn't make decisions, I made one. I didn't cry while writing it. I didn't hesitate. I just folded it clean and slid it into the envelope with the same care I had once used to pack Brendan's lunch in elementary school turkey sandwich thermos of apple juice. One handwritten note that said, "I believe in you." In this letter, there was no belief left to offer, only a boundary. I planned to send it in the morning, not for closure, not for effect, but so there would be no question, no doubt, no excuse. The decision had been mine, and it had been made before bed. I opened the bottom drawer and looked once more at the quote torn from my journal. When they believe you're weak, they forget. You still remember. I hadn't understood the full weight of those words until now. They weren't about strength. They were about return, about coming back to yourself after being pulled away by someone else's version of your story, and mine wasn't finished yet. The morning after I mailed the letter to Brendan and Kayla, I woke to a soft light spilling across the kitchen floor. I brewed a pot of tea and watched the steam curl against the window. The small house was silent, except for the sound of birds settling in the hedges outside. I set out 2 mugs in case Harold stopped by. Though I didn't expect anyone that early. I moved through the rooms with a steadiness that felt new. Not hurried, not watchful, just present. With each day that passed, I found small ways to build a life that was mine again. I led gentle breathing sessions at the church on Wednesdays, and sometimes Martha would call, just to talk about nothing in particular. Sometimes I would catch myself pausing at the door before bed, half expecting to hear footsteps on the porch or a car engine in the drive. But the night always stayed quiet. The foundation paperwork came through more quickly than I'd imagined. I signed the forms at my kitchen table and wrote the name, still hers, in neat script across the top. The mission was simple: help women reclaim what's theirs. Whether that was money, a voice, or just a sense of belonging. I set aside a small sum to start it. Nothing grand, just enough to make a difference in one life at a time. The house I left behind grew further away with each passing week. It wasn't bitterness that kept me from looking back. It was a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. I no longer waited for an apology or an explanation that would never come. I simply let the past rest in the old walls and let myself breathe in rooms that belonged only to me. I never heard directly from Brendan or Kayla after the letter. Martha told me they'd tried once more at the bank, but found every door closed. Harold checked on me often, sometimes with a sack of apples or a new book for the shelf. He never asked what had happened, only that I was doing well, and if I needed anything else. One afternoon, as I swept the porch, I realized that justice isn't always loud. It doesn't always arrive with a reckoning or a dramatic scene. Sometimes, justice is the quiet return to your own life, the gentle decision to choose peace over explanation or approval. So if you're listening now and you've ever had your voice questioned or your strength mistaken for weakness, I hope you remember, you still belong to yourself. That's what matters most. Leave a comment if this story brought something up for you, or if you've been through something similar, and if you're listening quietly. I hope you know you're not alone.